There's a moment that haunts me from my years working in premium retail. And I want to share it with you because it changed how I think about business strategy forever. I was in a meeting where someone suggested we add a new product feature that didn't fit our brand at all. And the strangest thing happened in that room. Nobody said no. Nobody asked whether this aligned with who we are. Everyone just started discussing implementation. That was the first time I recognized what I now call strategic drift. And once I learned to see it, I started noticing it everywhere. In businesses of every size, in every industry, the same pattern playing out again and again. Strategic drift is what happens when a business moves away from its core, through thousands of tiny decisions that each seem reasonable in isolation. Is the silent killer of growing businesses, because by the time you notice something is wrong, you're often already too far from who you were to find your way back easily. Let me start with the most famous example of strategic drift I've ever studied, because it shows perfectly how even the most beloved brands can lose themselves. In 2007, Howard Schultz wrote a memo that leaked to the press and sent shockwaves through the business world. Schultz had built Starbucks from a small Seattle coffee shop into a global phenomenon. But he had stepped back from daily leadership years earlier. And now, watching from the outside, he was alarmed by what he saw happening to his company. The memo described what Schultz called the watering down of the Starbucks experience and the commoditization of our brand. He pointed to specific decisions that seemed reasonable in isolation but had collectively transformed Starbucks into something unrecognizable. The company had stopped grinding coffee in stores to improve efficiency, but grinding coffee in stores was what made Starbucks smell like a coffee shop. Without that aroma, customers walked into what felt like any other fast food restaurant. The stores had installed automatic espresso machines that were faster and more consistent, but these machines blocked the view between baristas and customers. That visual connection had been essential to the theater of coffee making that Schultz had designed into the original Starbucks experience. The company had expanded into breakfast sandwiches, which generated incremental revenue, but introduced smells that overwhelmed the coffee aroma. Now customers walked in and smelled eggs and cheese instead of freshly ground beans. And Starbucks had opened so many stores so quickly that they were cannibalizing their own sales, with their locations sometimes directly across the street from each other. The sense of discovery and specialness that came from finding a Starbucks had evaporated because there was one on every corner. Here's what's crucial to understand about the story. Every single one of these decisions made sense in isolation. Automatic machines reduced labor costs and improved consistency. Breakfast sandwiches increased average ticket size. Aggressive expansion captured market share before competitors could. If you had been in those meetings, you might have voted for every single one of those changes. They were all individually defensible, but collectively, they had transformed Starbucks from a third place between home and work, which was Schultz's original vision, into just another fast food chain that happened to sell coffee. By the time Schultz returned as CEO in January 2008, Starbucks stock had dropped more than 40%. Same-store sales were declining. The brand that had once commanded fierce customer loyalty was becoming interchangeable with McDonald's coffee, which had improved dramatically and cost half as much. And here's the part that should terrify every founder. The people running Starbucks weren't incompetent. They weren't trying to destroy the brand. They were executing what looked like smart business strategy. The drift happened because of the accumulated weight of decisions that each seemed reasonable but collectively pushed the company away from its essential nature. Schultz's turnaround is instructive. He closed 600 underperforming stores. He shut down every Starbucks in America for an afternoon to retrain baristas on espresso making, which cost millions in lost revenue, but sent a message about what mattered. He brought back the sound and smell of coffee grinding in stores. He discontinued products that didn't align with the coffee experience. But what strikes me most about the recovery is what Schultz said about it later. When you build something from the ground up and have so much at stake and you're watching it drift, well, I had to come back. It needed love and nurturing, and we needed to remind people of the cause of the company, not the revenue of the company or the efficiency of the company, but the cause. That's what strategic drift erodes, and that's what's so hard to see when you're in the middle of it. Now, here's the practical part. How do you build an early warning system that catches drift before it becomes catastrophic? I use something I call the origin compass in my strategic audits, and the simplest version of it is a set of 5 questions that any decision should pass through. First, does this align with why we started? Not does this generate revenue or does this serve a customer need, but does this align with the original purpose that brought that business into existence? Second, does this strengthen or dilute what makes us distinctive? Every business has something that makes it different from alternatives. Does this decision reinforce that distinctiveness or erode it? Third, would this make sense to our founding customers? Not to new customers we might attract, but to the people who believed in us before we had proof of concept. Would they recognize this decision as consistent with the business they supported? Fourth, does this create complexity or clarity? Will this decision make it easier or harder to explain what we do and why we matter? Complexity is often the first symptom of drift. Fifth, are we doing this because it aligns with our purpose or because we can? Having the capability to do something is not the same as having the mission alignment to do it. So here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to audit your business for drift indicators. Look at the decisions you have made in the last 12 months. How many of them were evaluated against your core purpose versus purely against financial outcomes? Look at how you describe your business today versus how you described it 2 years ago. Has complexity crept in? And most importantly, look at your revenue composition. What percentage comes from activities that align perfectly with your original value proposition versus activities that have grown up around it? If you see warning signs, that doesn't mean you have failed. It means you have caught something early enough to correct. Strategic drift is reversible when you recognize it before it becomes catastrophic, but it requires the courage to make decisions that might reduce short-term revenue in service of long-term alignment. Howard Schultz closed 600 stores. These were painful short-term decisions that protected the long-term brand equity. If you want help evaluating strategic drift in your own business, True North audits include complete origin compass mapping. The link is in the description. Next week, I want to show you something I find fascinating. How businesses that seem completely new are actually built on patterns that worked in other industries decades ago. Category creation is rarely true creation, and once you see this, you'll never look at successful businesses the same way again. Thanks for watching. I'll see you then.